wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Democracy. Or maybe a president, or maybe it's a constitution that you need. All you know is that Second Take has had your back throughout the year. We certainly hope that your Christmas is fantastic. It is everything that you want it to be. This Christmas season is full of love, whether you're enjoying a functional democracy or a dictator, which is why we want to celebrate Christmas the Second Take style, getting a second take of our second takes. But Christmas, as you know, always has a special theme for us. We like to honor those of us who clearly work much harder than every other African, the dictators of the year. Welcome to the show. It was a tough competition, choosing the dictators of the year. As you know, in Africa, we have plenty to choose from, and we could have gone global. America seems to be cooking their own dictator quite well. They like what's going on in that space. But we had two outstanding performers, people who understand how to wield a throne and to hold it by any means necessary. Don't let my tone confuse you. We are not actually celebrating what they do, but we are spotlighting first Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. Yoweri Museveni has been Uganda's president since 1986. Yes, Gen Zs, that's before TikTok, smartphones, or even Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And he's showing no signs of letting go. 80 years old and still clinging to the throne like it's something bolted to his seat. Museveni has ruled through a mix of old-school autocrat tricks, changing the constitution when it didn't suit him, term limits, age limits, delete, stacking courts with loyalists, keeping the military tight to his chest, and using state funds like it's his personal monopoly game. Every election since 1996 has mysteriously gone his way, even when the math looks off and the Wi-Fi gets cut. The 2021 election, for example, was more Hunger Games than democracy. Ballot stuffing, internet blackouts, and a crackdown that left at least 54 people dead. And now, with the 2026 election on the horizon, the vibes are getting even darker. The states turned the heat up on Bobi Wine's party, the National Unity Platform, NUP, with raids, arrests, and disappearances happening like it's some dystopian scavenger hunt. The US Holocaust Memorial Museum even raised the alarm about potential mass atrocities, which isn't exactly the kind of tourism pitch Uganda wants. But things really went off the rails when Museveni's son, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, the chief of Defense Forces, an official Twitter menace, and heir apparent in this political drama, decided to announce to the world that he'd kidnapped Bobi Wine's bodyguard, Eddie Mutwe. Yes, kidnapped. In a post that read like a villain monologue, he bragged about having Mutwe in my basement, called him a grasshopper, and claimed to be using him as a human punching bag. He even posted about shaving the guy's head, threatening castration, and promised Bobi Wine, "You're next." This was not a parody account. When Mutwe showed up in court days later, barely able to stand and clearly tortured, the government tried to charge him with robbery. Meanwhile, Uganda's Human Rights Commission ordered Muhoozi to release him, like that ever works. And the NUP told Ugandans to save the images as receipts for when his regime eventually gets dragged to court. This isn't Muhoozi's first time playing dictator cosplay. He's posted threats before, called for beheadings, and has already been named in testimonies to the International Criminal Court for running so-called torture centers. And while he claimed in 2024 that he wouldn't run in the next election and would instead support Daddy Dearest, no one's buying it. He's got the army, he's got the attention, and he clearly thinks being president is just a family business. Online, though, Ugandans are calling it what it is, a dynasty pretending to be a democracy. People are also questioning the entire point of elections in a system where the rules are made up and the votes don't seem to matter. The big picture? Museveni's reign is less about governance and more about survival, using force, fear, and family ties to keep the system rigged and the public quiet. His supporters point to economic growth and stability, but for Uganda's young, wired, politically aware generation, this looks more like a hostage situation. The Mutwe case exposed the regime's darkest habits in high definition, and while international outrage is bubbling, real pressure remains limited. Still, the arrogance of Muhoozi's basement confession might just backfire, sparking resistance at home and abroad. Whether that turns into real change, well, that depends on whether Ugandans can build a movement strong enough to pull the plug on 4 decades of rule by force. Several elections happened in Africa this year, but no election was quite like the one I'm about to talk about. See, in this election, the winner won with 98% of the vote. 98% of the vote. I'm sure that's all above board. I'm sure that's how democracy works, especially because there were no opposition parties allowed to contest. So I guess the love is very substantive. And we are talking about none other than the new entry into the dictators list. She's making sure that feminism is well represented, the one and only Samia Suluhu Hassan. Tanzania. Land of Mount Kilimanjaro, Serengeti dreams, and election results so impressive they make North Korea look like an amateur startup. On October 29, 2025, the country once again performed that sacred African ritual called democracy, a ceremony where citizens line up, ballots are cast, observers take notes, and the ruling party wins by exactly the kind of margin that only divine intervention or well-trained arithmetic can deliver. President Samia Suluhu Hassan of the legendary Chama Pinduzi CCM secured a gentle, modest 97.66% of the vote. Because when you've done such a great job, why leave room for doubt? The official turnout was said to be 87%, which is impressive considering the opposition had been arrested, disqualified, and in some cases, disappeared. Your democracy is thriving when people risk dying just to abstain. The main opposition, Chadema, boycotted after their leader, Tundu Lissu, was charged with treason, proving that in Tanzania, speaking against the government isn't just rebellion, it's performance art. ACT Wazalendo's candidate was disqualified too, because you can't have elections which are cluttered with choices. That just confuses the voters. Post-election protests turned bloody, with opposition groups claiming around 700 deaths, while the UN confirmed at least 10, because international organizations prefer their numbers low and their adjectives diplomatic. The African Union arrived, as it always does, with its army of clipboards and cautious optimism. The AU election observation mission was led by former Botswana President Mokgweetsi Masisi. It's good to see him working after that hectic defeat to Duma Boko back home. 72 observers from 31 countries were deployed, which in Samia's math equals 72 people she hoped would be polite tourists taking notes while the real story happens off camera. Their preliminary report on November 5 declared the elections did not comply with AU principles, normative frameworks, and international obligations. In other words, it was a circus. The AU pointed out that Tanzania's 1977 constitution still forbids judicial review of presidential results, meaning once the winner is announced, God himself couldn't file an appeal. They also reminded everyone that reforms promised after the 2020 elections were about as real as campaign promises about power cuts. Opposition leaders were either jailed, exiled, or perhaps enjoying extended spa treatments in undisclosed locations. Ballot boxes were stuffed, observers were kicked out after 5 minutes, and journalists were treated like criminals for reporting anything other than victory speeches. The AU found that over 200 enforced disappearances had taken place since 2019, proving that in some parts of Africa, political engagement is literally a disappearing act. And of course, the internet shut down. Because in modern elections, nothing says free and fair like turning off the Wi-Fi so no one can tell the difference. The AU concluded that Tanzania urgently needed constitutional reform, judicial empowerment, and inclusive dialogue, three things African governments typically define as treason, obstruction, and foreign interference. Now, the Southern African Development Community, SADC, decided to have its own look at Tanzania. The SADC mission, led by former Malawi Speaker Richard Msowoya, brought 80 people, 66 of whom were actual observers, and the rest, one assumes, were translators, bodyguards, and people making sure the air conditioning worked. Their verdict? The elections fell short of the requirements of the SADC principles and guidelines governing democratic elections. Translation: it was bad. Like even by our standards, bad. They diplomatically said voters could not express their democratic will, which sounds poetic until you realize it means the ballot boxes were doing all the talking. SADC noted systematic intimidation, arrests, misuse of state resources, and what they called an uneven playing field. That's generous. It's more like CCM had a Formula One car while everyone else was told to jog barefoot. Observers were harassed, interrogated, and even had their photos deleted. Counting was secretive, results unverifiable, and the internet blackout turned the whole process into a national guessing game. SADC praised the orderly pre-election environment, which is like congratulating a lion for not eating the antelope before the hunt begins. They recommended allowing independent candidates and including youth in politics, because if you can't vote for change, at least let the young people help count how hopeless it all is. It was SADC's strongest criticism since Zimbabwe 2023, which tells you how low the continental bar is, because once every 2 years, they seem to rediscover integrity. The AU and SADC reports were essentially two versions of the same breakup letter. Both said Tanzania's laws violated every charter ever signed in Addis Ababa or Gaborone. Both said opposition parties were treated like domestic terrorists. Both said the voting process was as transparent as a dirty mirror. And both ended with that polite African optimism: recommendations, consultations, and calls for dialogue, like prescribing herbal tea to a patient who's missing vital organs. What is interesting is that just days before those reports, AU Commission Chair Muhammad Ali Yusuf had already congratulated President Hassan on her victory and reaffirmed AU support for Tanzania's democratic institutions. It's the continental version of sending flowers to the crime scene. The AU has perfected this art of doublespeak. One branch writes scathing reports while the other sends congratulatory tweets. It's as if the AU believes democracy is like football. You can referee and cheer for the home team at the same time. Now, The rest of the world reacted to Tanzania the way you'd expect, with long sighs and short statements. Zimbabwe's president, Emerson Mnangagwa, never one to miss an opportunity to endorse creative mathematics in an election, called Hassan's victory visionary leadership. Coming from him, that's practically a peer review. Uganda's Museveni, still running his own democracy on life support, congratulated her too, perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit. Somalia's Hassan Sheikh Mohamud praised her resilience, which is African code for, "You survived the scandal, sister." Even Qatar's Amir Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani chimed in, probably just to stay on everyone's good side before building another stadium for someone somewhere. Hassan's inauguration on November 3 was held under heavy military security at a base in Dodoma, breaking tradition by excluding civilians, because in modern Tanzania, even victory is classified. The guest list looked like a networking event for pragmatic regionalism. Zambia's Hakainde Hichilema, Mozambique's Daniel Chapo, Somalia's Hassan Sheikh, and Burundi's Evariste Ndayishimiye attended. Everyone else suddenly had something urgent to do. Kenya's Ruto was missing. Museveni was not there, Kagame was mysteriously unavailable, and Ramaphosa was probably preoccupied by more slander from Trump. The message was subtle, but clear. Tanzania's democracy had become contagious, and no one wanted to catch it. But Zambia and Mozambique had no choice. They share borders and business with Tanzania. Zambia gets over half its imported fuel through Dar es Salaam. So Hichilema's attendance was less endorsement, more insurance policy. Mozambique's presence was about SADC solidarity and trade routes, because in regional politics, ethics travel economy class. You should know this. Analysts called it pragmatic diplomacy. We call it what it is. Mind your own pipeline politics. So what does this election tell us? CCM doesn't hold elections to test popularity. It holds them to remind everyone who's still in charge. The AU and SADC, meanwhile, play their assigned roles in the continental theater. They show up, they frown, they issue reports full of adjectives, and then they go home. Their recommendations will sit unread until the next election, when they'll be retyped with new dates and old promises. The international community will express concern, civil society will risk arrest, and the rest of us will pretend to be surprised when the ruling party wins again, by 98% perhaps, just to show progress. You have to hand it to CCM. They've mastered the art of modern African politics. Hold elections often enough to look democratic, control them tightly enough to stay in power, and surround yourself with just enough regional allies who value trade routes over truth. It's a delicate balance, like juggling grenades with a smile. And President Samia Suluhu Hassan has done it gracefully. Her 97.66% win isn't a number, it's a message. We can do this forever. So yes, Tanzania held an election. Yes, there were ballots, observers, speeches, and even reports. But in the end, it was less about who won and more about who dared to pretend it mattered. The AU and SADC can keep writing their polite reprimands. The rest of us will keep writing jokes. Because sometimes satire is the only way left to tell the truth. And as long as African leaders keep treating democracy like an inheritance rather than a responsibility, shows like Second Take will never run out of material. Because in this continent of eternal incumbents, the only thing that changes every 5 years is the font on the ballot paper. Inside Chamwino State House in Dodoma, Tanzania, President Samia Suluhu Hassan unveiled her new cabinet with the serene confidence of a leader who knows the country can protest only as loudly as her security forces allow, presenting 27 ministers and 29 deputies wrapped in the language of efficiency and accountability, though the real theme seemed to be family, friends, and anyone who answers her calls on the first ring. Because Tanzania quickly realized the cabinet list read less like a governance strategy and more like the seating arrangement at a very exclusive family wedding. The star appointment, of course, was Wamu Hafid Amir, the president's 43-year-old daughter, who earned the title of Deputy Minister of Education, Science and Technology under Professor Adolf Mkenda, making it the first time in Tanzanian history that an education portfolio looked like a direct extension of the family WhatsApp group. Yes, Wanu has been a CCM MP since 2005 and sits in the Zanzibar House of Representatives. And yes, she retained her seat in the 2025 election, but the coincidence of merit aligning perfectly with oldest child is the kind of miracle that makes even religious leaders pause and reconsider what counts as divine intervention. Not to be outdone, the Minister of Health is now Mohammed Mchengerwa, her 46-year-old son-in-law, fresh from becoming the CCM MP for a refugee in Pwani region with absolutely no prior cabinet experience, but who, if nothing else, has experience showing up to family functions on time, which in Tanzanian politics now seems to be a transferable skill. Together, the daughter and son-in-law combo gave the government a certain buy one, get one minister aesthetic, leaving ordinary Tanzanians wondering whether the next reshuffle would include cousins, nephews, or perhaps a special desk for grandchildren to start their public service internships early. President Hassan insisted the entire reshuffle was based strictly on merit, though critics pointed out that if Tanzanian merit looks this hereditary, then the country might as well start printing government forms with preferred family connection as a mandatory field. Those same critics also argued this was not just about merit, but about cementing a more authoritarian posture, a continuation of the repressive legacy inherited from John Magufuli, whose death in 2021 placed Hassan in power and briefly earned her praise for lifting media bans before she reverted to the old classics: pre-election arrests, opposition disqualifications, and the now traditional Tanzanian election specials featuring curfews and a nationwide internet blackout. Because nothing says free and fair like forcibly unplugging an entire nation. Post-election, things didn't get better. Mass treason charges and delayed vote tallies completed in under 72 hours despite the chaos created a political environment so opaque even the results looked like they were afraid to show their real faces. When you combine that with the new family-heavy cabinet, you get a picture of a president not just consolidating power, but bubble-wrapping it, locking it in a cabinet and placing it safely next to her relatives, just to make sure the opposition doesn't breathe on it. Kikwete's promotion added even more flavor to this political stew, confirming that Tanzania's politics still runs on a mentorship system where the mentor's son gets promoted, the mentee's children get ministerial posts, and the general public, well, they get curfews. With President Hassan in her constitutionally final term, scrutiny is intensifying both inside and outside the country. This cabinet, instead of symbolizing fresh leadership, has become a neon sign flashing phrases like dynasty expansion, loyalty insurance, and second-term comfort zone. Yet the administration presents all of this with a straight face, insisting everything is normal, democratic, and properly managed, even as the rest of the continent shakes its head with the kind of disappointment only African mothers can muster when another country performs political gymnastics previously thought impossible. Tanzania now stands at a defining moment. A government insulated by family ties and political debts, a citizenry muted by repression, a youth population demanding more than symbolic ministries, and a region watching closely, wondering how a president once celebrated for easing restrictions ended up assembling a cabinet that looks like it was drafted during a family vacation. Until something changes, Until a resignation, a reversal, a reform, or even an honest admission, the story remains the same. Tanzania is navigating a turbulent political landscape with a leadership style that mixes dynasty with suppression, loyalty with fear, and governance with the unmistakable scent of family perfume. And so that's been our Dictator of the Year episode. We end with a message from what a lot of people consider to be a future dictator. We don't know, we just know that he definitely does not work well with others. Your Christmas message and our goodbye is from the one and only Julius Juju Malema.
Enjoy your festive season. If you finish this festive season, you have never given your old clothes to someone deserving, you must know you are greedy. You are the most useless human being. If you still have clothes that you were wearing at high school in your wardrobe, and when you were young, when there are so many people without clothes, you must know it's not only ANC a problem, you are a problem. If you are going to be having festivities and a meal, if you can't give them some food, invite them over so you can share a meal with the poor of the poorest. Let's make it easy this festive season for the poor. As they see other children shining and other children eating, their pain becomes even more. You will lessen it by making them feel they are part of the future of South Africa. You have a problem with their parents, do not have problem with children. Never use children to fight battles. Always protect the children of South Africa. Let's make sure that these children are not subjected to trauma. Let's make sure that these children look to the future with a positive attitude because their neighbor was good to them. I am what I am because my neighbor and neighbors were good to me. And in return, I'm good to them. Let's be good because we don't know what those children of your neighbors are going to become. And when they become something else in future in society, they will remember you. Help those who cannot help you and do not write their names down because you must not remember them. When you remember them, it's because you want to enslave them. You want to make them your slaves and constantly remind them that you have once helped them. Do not do that. Let it be an enjoyable one, even in poverty, in suffering, in unemployment. There is a moment we need to pause and appreciate God for giving us life. Thank you very much.